Ramdas, I'm intrigued by your last remark with respect to the pain and how we in America are an island, and sometimes what we do, how we deal with the pain and suffering in the world that we see around us. And in many respects, I think we try to negate our own pain because we don't want it. And in the book, you touch on this in one of the chapters, but the process of letting go of our pain involves our having to experience
acknowledge
the pain,
it, allow it,
acknowledge it, note it.
If people feel that the richness of human life, that their happiness only comes with the positive side of things, without the negative side, without the kind of emotional negative feelings, with the pain, with loneliness, with self-pity, with anger, with depressions, this is all part of the weave of life. And to joyously live life means to joyously acknowledge that we are human and we have this whole bag of stuff we've got to work with all the time. And if half of your life, I mean, you're dying, everybody's dying, and if that is somehow an error or a mistake or something that takes away your joy, I mean, imagine it's like summer is ruined because, you know, fall is coming. I mean, I just don't, I realized finally you've got to absorb all of it and allow all of it and work with your own pain and your own suffering as the first rule as to how you can help someone else. Otherwise, you're treating their suffering in a way to keep it distant from you because you're afraid of it. And if you're afraid of suffering, what you do with other people's suffering is something that in some subtle way perpetuates their suffering. That's the one.
Also, I think you're in an ideal position, noting your own journey, to reflect on what happened, I think, in the late 60s, some early 70s with some of the spiritual groups, that there was a great emphasis on love and light, and almost a real denial of the other part of life, and perhaps what the Buddha meant when he said life is suffering.
Exactly. We in the 60s were we were upbeat with not a full recognition of the thick part of life that we had to come to terms with. And that's, to me, why the 80s are much more exciting. Because I don't feel that the consciousness that we touched in the 60s was lost. I find it in the 80s. My audiences are much more heterogeneous. And they are, and I'm not saying anything, I'm not compromising what I say the same thing I was saying in the 60s, but they're hearing it, which means that it's in the culture much more deeply. But it's also the people from the 60s who now have children and responsibilities and so on, they are also grounded much more. And that grounding is the balance. I think you're free in your incarnation, not in spite of it. That's what I feel now. And I think in the 60s we thought we were quickly getting out of our incarnation. We were all becoming enlightened and going off to la-la land. And I don't think that's the way of it at all.
You know, in the book, How Can I Help, there were really, I think, an extraordinary collection of stories of real life helping. And I think one of the things that made them extraordinary is that they were anonymous.
That's nice.
That they were just there.
Yeah.
And you still had the human flavor, but the real thing that came through was that there wasn't someone doing this to get a plaque or a certificate or a reward of some kind. It was really
just all of us living life.
Yeah.
And the kind of common everyday things that all of us have in terms of dealing with pain, our own pain and each other's pain.
Yeah. I'd like to hear about how you gathered the stories that are in the book.
Well, we gathered them in a variety of ways. We gathered them through, one of the ways was through the Volunteers of America, the VAC, which is a large national association. And what they've done is, because they have volunteer agencies in all the cities, they hear stories about volunteers who have done stuff, not, again, for rewards, just done stuff. And they actually issue awards every year. And we got all their award lists, and we started to go out and interview these people. And then we just went into communities and asked who were the people who people knew about that were doing service. And then we all had friends and relatives, and our stories are in there. And we just generally went into the nooks and crannies of society to get the stuff.
So it really is a grassroots reflection of what's happening in America.
Yeah.
And I think all too often in our culture, in our society, because we are surrounded pretty much with the tools of media emphasizing what's wrong with our society, mostly, we don't see what's good about what's happening that's good.
One of the things I'd like SEVA to do this next year is to put out a magazine, which is like an upbeat people magazine, which is people, it's like these stories, but put in a magazine format with pictures and just showing, like if you look at a lot of the stars, the public media image figures, you very rarely focus on what else they do besides the media thing they do, like if they're in Dynasty or something like that. But a lot of them have money and power, and a lot of them use it in very compassionate ways. And that stuff gets played down because it doesn't have quite the juice that a divorce has, or some sexual escapade or a cocaine hit or something
Right.
like that. And I really love just bringing that quality in, not in a kind of saccharine, righteous way, but just in a sometimes hip, but sometimes just tender way, the tenderness of our human encounter with each other. Because relationship, you grow so much through relationship. And as much as you grow through a love affair or you grow through dealing with your parents, you also grow through the people you serve or are served by. And if you don't feel when you've worked in a relationship where you're a helping agent that you ended up helped as much as you're helping, forget it. You're probably doing the wrong business. That's really the issue of burnout, things like that.
Yeah. What happens? You mentioned burnout. That when we do get burned, frequently you do find people burned out that are in serving or helping professions. What's happening there?
Well, part of it, of course, is they're overwhelmed by the amount of suffering, and they're overwhelmed that no matter how much they do, it seems like they're not doing a hell of a lot. They're not doing enough. It's like Gandhi said, what you do may seem insignificant, but it's very important you do it. Important in the total warp and woof of things, and also important for your own spiritual growth. People burn out because of, it's interesting because the Bhagavad Gita gives two injunctions which are really the crux of the matter of non-burnout. One is, don't be identified with being the actor, meaning you do what you do, but you're just part of a process of doing it. Don't think I'm doing it. And the other is, don't be attached to the fruits of the action. You do it as well as you can, and what happens, happens. I mean, a social worker who tries to help somebody who isn't helpable by them, if they are attached to being the other person getting helped, they're going to be frustrated, and they're going to be anxious and angry, and they're going to end up burned out. While if they did what they could do, and then they appreciate God's play, and they appreciate whether the person gets helped or doesn't help, that's none of their business. I mean, they'll do what they can. It's very artful to do that, though, to do an action with full involvement, but without identification with being the actor and without attachment to the fruits.
I think what happens a lot is that we create a screen around ourselves or put up a wall around ourselves so that we're really not there when we're there. So that we go to the hospital
Yeah.
to visit a sick friend, and
Yeah.
because of the pain and suffering,
Yeah.
and because we identify with it personally, we put a wall up and say, so I have to do this to visit my
Yeah.
friend, make him feel better, and then when we leave, it's out of the way, it's gone.
There's some beautiful little short vignettes in here of somebody blind in a hospital who hears the tone of voice in the visitor as to whether they're visiting which way, whether they're visiting in a way to push it away because of pity, or whether they're visiting in an embracing way where somebody's really there with. And this person says, many people come to visit me, but almost nobody comes, really.
Yeah, I also recall the story of the very sick individual, cancer or whatever, with the soap opera going in front of him while he's in the bed, of the various people coming through, and
Yeah.
winding up with saying, hello, is anyone there? Is anyone there? Hello, are you there?
Yeah.
The nurses and the doctors.
Because of the roles. Everybody, professionals, feel they protect themselves by hiding in their roles and not coming out as human beings, because there's so much suffering. I mean, imagine a nurse on an oncology ward, for example. I was just on the oncology wards in the intensive care with my stepmother for many weeks, and I noticed that the nurses, which of them had to hide in their role to protect themselves, and they were just professionally warm, and which ones were really human right on that ward. And I was awed that there were a goodly percentage that were really right there and human, and they weren't burning out. They were treating that life as part of their richness. The others were waiting to get to their dates or their evenings or there's something for life to begin, and this was a job. And if you get into that, what you do is you destroy your own living spirit by doing that. You become a professional, which makes everybody else object. It's very divisive the way you do it. I mean, if you're a doctor, the other person has to be a patient. But behind that are your two fellow beings reaching for light and trying to understand a universe of mystery.
Yeah, it's really interesting, I think, how we do that. And again, I think it's our wanting to negate pain.
Yeah.
wanting to push it away,
Yeah.
not really feel it.
While you can just open to the pain and soften around it. It's interesting when you take something like a specific pain in your body. Stephen Levine's done some beautiful meditations on this, where you take a pain and you start to feel the quality of the pain, whether it's solid or rough or jagged, like a stone or something like that, whether it permeates all through the body or it's localized, and you start to soften around it and just feel into it and treat it like a meditation object rather than that pain. Because most of the time, the minute you start to change your way of dealing with the pain, you begin to see how much your resistance against it made the pain worse. And you find out that when you're not resisting against pain, when you're just working with it, you need much less painkiller if you have really intractable pain, you know.
Yeah, just sort of, pain works as a teacher.
Oh, it is. It's just a strong stimulus, and you can learn how to open to it. It's your anticipation of pain that is what gets you to tighten, and the more you tighten, the worse the pain is. And so you start a cycle with your own mind, really, about pain.
What is the connection between serving and helping in one's own spiritual evolution, development, growth?
Well, in Eastern traditions, there are things called karma yoga. The word seva is a Sanskrit word which means service. But it's interesting, in the East, they have a word dharma, which means doing one's dharma, means doing what's appropriate in the way of things. And if you are taking care of your father, that's your dharma. Like I take care of my father, that's my dharma. It's in the way of things that if a father needs a son, the son's there for him. That's in the way of things. Now, if I go beyond the call of duty and do something more than that, that's seva. Seva, they say, you only do with grace, because seva you would only want to do if you had a deeper conception of the universe than the one of I'm separate and what's in it for me. Then you'd still have to do your dharma, but you wouldn't do seva. And so seva becomes a higher way of being in the universe if you're doing service out of a sense of we are all one. I mean, awakened people do seva. Unawakened people do their dharma. And most people that do service and helping often do it out of obligation or guilt or as a job or in some way that keeps them stuck in their own separateness. It can be both. It can be both a means to getting to God, and it can also be a way in which God expresses itself through human beings. Those are two different styles in which service is related to God.
I'm speaking with Ram Dass, co-author of How Can I Help with Paul Gorman. We're going to continue with our conversation and our exploration of helping and service, and how can we help, how can helping really better serve ourselves in just 1 minute.